will go ahead and get started. Just a little preview on the information that we're going to see today. I'm going to talk a little bit about basic sweat physiology, just so we can understand in which conditions our body might be sweating more, might be needing more electrolytes. Definitely going to talk about some symptoms and the impact of dehydration. I think it's important that we understand what a disadvantage we're putting ourselves at in terms of athletic performance and dehydration if we're not hydrated appropriately. Then I'm going to give you some tools that you can use to kind of assess if you are hydrated, just some kind of signs and symptoms, things to look out for. Then we'll start to build that plan together, and finally figuring out how sports drinks and electrolytes kind of make their way into this plan. So let's get started with talking about basic sweat physiology first. So if we think about it, when we're exercising, when we're training, our core temperature starts to heat up. As our muscles start to produce heat, our core temperature goes up and our body's internal temperature starts to rise. So as a protective mechanism, what our body does is it sends that warm, hotter blood to the surface of our skin. So away from the core to the surface of the skin. And when that warm blood goes to the surface of the skin, it kind of activates the sweat glands to produce fluid and put it out onto the skin's surface. So then we have this wet sweat on the skin's surface. And in the most ideal world, we get a nice breeze that kind of blows by the surface of our skin, and it encourages that evaporation and it pulls the water off the surface of our skin. And when it's pulling the sweat off, then it also is creating, pulling the heat off as well. So that's kind of how that works in the most ideal situation is your core temperature gets warm. In an effort to protect itself, our body pushes warm blood closer to the surface of our skin. We sweat, the sweat evaporates, the process of evaporation cools our skin off, and then we're able to send that cool blood back into our body to make sure that our core temperature doesn't get too high. So there are a couple of things that can kind of impact this for sure. If we're exercising in really high temperatures, then or our core could get hot even faster, and we could be doing even more shunting of that hot blood to the surface of our skin, and doing more sweating and more evaporation. Another thing that can impact this is the humidity. Okay, a lot of times maybe we'll listen to the weather in the morning and the weather person will say, it's 90% humidity today. And so essentially that makes me think, all right, the air is already 90% full of water. So if the air molecules are already 90% full of water, how much capacity do they really have to pull sweat off the surface of our skin? Not a lot. Whereas if it's 20% humidity, it's a little bit drier, then that dry air has a lot more capacity to pull the sweat off of our skin and into the air. So if it's going to be really humid conditions, we have to think that we're not going to be as able to evaporate this sweat off of our skin. Therefore, we're probably going to have some impact that comes from that, and our body's going to have to work even harder to keep that core temperature in a safe zone. The other thing we really need to think about is clothing as well. Now we have a lot of great sweat wicking clothing, and that's really, really important. We want to be able to get the sweat off the surface of our skin. We have some sports medicine staff here that say kind of dry skin, happy skin, and using the towels to get the sweat off of our skin as much as we can. That's really going to be important. If we can't get the sweat off, if we can't evaporate the sweat off, it's going to impact our ability to keep ourselves cool and safe while we're training. So this is just some really basic sweat physiology, but I think it's important to kind of understand it at least at this level so that we know what we are after when it comes to hydrating around exercise. So let's talk about some of the impacts of dehydration. So when we think about dehydration, we're losing, a ton of sweat through the surface of our skin in order to cool ourselves, and we're not putting enough back in during exercise, or maybe we didn't put enough in before, or maybe even after. Why does it even matter? Well, it actually starts to impact our blood volume. Our blood volume goes down, and when our blood volume goes down, I kind of like to think about this as our blood is getting thicker, all right? And we have to use this thicker blood to try to transport oxygen and nutrients around in our body. And so that's going to make that system not really be working optimally. Another way I kind of like to think about this is in terms of a highway. So if we think about a highway system, if we have a 5-lane highway, we can get a lot of cars moving up and down that highway very, very quickly. Whereas if we have a 1-lane highway, it's going to take a little bit longer for all the cars to get where they need to go. And so if we think about in terms of our stream and our circulatory system, if we are really well hydrated, we have that 5-lane highway. So we can get oxygen and nutrients going to the places that they need to go very quickly. If we are dehydrated and we have lower blood volume or thicker blood, it's going to take oxygen and nutrients longer to get where they have to go. So that means that our heart rate is going to have to go up because our heart is going to have to work harder to push all of those that oxygen and nutrients around in our body. And our heart rate can really only go so high until we have to stop or slow down. So it could impact our exercise capacity. We definitely see decreased performance because of this. We see decreased endurance performance. Actually, even just a small amount, 2 to 3% dehydration for a distance runner can lead to a big decrease in 10K performance. So we've seen that in the literature, but we've also seen a lot of strength and power deficits as well. So it impacts all kinds of exercise when we go into it dehydrated or become dehydrated when we're working. So it also impacts our ability to distribute heat. All right, we talked about how the circulatory system is so important in bringing that blood from the core temperature or from the core out to the surface of our skin. And so it's this system is going to be impacted if we are dehydrated, and that can put us at risk for heat cramps, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. I pulled this research article because I always think it's super interesting. And it's from 2015, and it's basically looking at a pretty mild amount of dehydration and how that actually leads to driving errors. So dehydration is not just for athletes and athletic performance. A little bit of hypohydration or a little bit of dehydration can actually make us make more driving mistakes as well. So it's important to consider that maybe after training and you have to take a long drive home for some reason, we want to make sure that we're hydrated for safety reasons as well. So you should definitely check out that article. It's really interesting. Yes, so knowing that all those bad things can happen when we are dehydrated, how do we tell if we are adequately hydrated? So there's a couple of things. I say we can check our weight, we can check our urine, or we can check our symptoms, or maybe check all three. So we can check our weight by just doing something really simple. Before we exercise, we can get on a scale. And then when we're done exercising, we can weigh ourselves out in similar clothing. All right. And the difference in weight is going to be all fluid. It's going to be nothing else. It's not going to be a difference of pounds of muscle lost or gained. It's not going to be a difference of fat pounds lost or gained. In that short of a period of time, if your weight fluctuates, it is fluid. So that's cool because we can use this as a tool. All right. So if we are, let's say, a 200-pound person and we lose 4 pounds of fluid or more, that's an amount, that's that 2% amount that's going to impact our performance and potentially our health. So we want to try to avoid losing more than 2% of our body weight from our pre-training weight to our post-training weight. And like I said, weighing out in similar clothing is going to be really important because if we weigh out in wet, sweat-filled clothing, it's going to impact that experiment and that calculation a little bit. So, but you don't have to get that crazy. You don't have to get on a scale if you don't have a scale or don't want to get on a scale. You can just check your urine. Is your urine color pale yellow to clear? Are you going to the bathroom at least every 2 to 3 hours during the day? And are you going kind of an ample amount of urine? And so if you're checking those boxes, you're in a pretty good spot in terms of hydration. If you can go the entire morning without having to stop at the bathroom one time, you're probably a little bit dehydrated. So that's a sign to you, an easy sign just to crank up your hydration a little bit, and we'll give you some tips for doing that in a second. Uh, Third, check your symptoms. We need to be really aware of any abnormal symptoms so that we can address them. So, are we thirsty? Is our mouth dry? Are we becoming dizzy? Do we have a headache? Do we have just a small amount of urine and it's really dark and we're not going to the bathroom very frequently at all? As we get down the road of hydration, of dehydration, it actually can impact our ability to sweat. So if you notice during exercise that you've stopped sweating, that's actually quite dangerous. That's a symptom that we need to pay attention to, because if we've stopped sweating, then it's going to our core temperature really doesn't have any way to regulate itself safely. So keep in mind those symptoms. And if you're noticing any of these, it should be a sign that we need to make some adjustments in your hydration. So let's get into some hydration planning now. We have some rules of thumb. All right, in terms of daily, how much fluid should we be getting in a day? It's about 50 to 100% of your body weight in ounces. So if we go back to, let's say, a 150-pound person, should be getting somewhere between 75 ounces and 150 ounces in a day. And so many of our athletes here have the green Gatorade bottles. And these green Gatorade bottles that we have for our athletes here are 32 ounces. So if somebody is 150 pounds, needing at least 75 ounces a day, we would probably recommend 2 to 3 of these green Gatorade bottles each day as just kind of a baseline place to start as a total amount. So maybe you're listening and you're thinking, wow, I am maybe not even getting one full green Gatorade bottle. I would recommend starting kind of slowly to ramp this up. I wouldn't go from consuming just one green Gatorade bottle a day to 3 green Gatorade bottles a day, because it takes our kidneys a little bit of time to adjust to our new hydration status. And so if we just kind of start chugging one day, we're going to have to go to the bathroom all the time. Our body won't be absorbing it because we just made our change that was a little bit too drastic. And that goes for kind of chugging in general. Our body doesn't absorb all of the water if we drink it in large amounts really, really fast. So it's better to kind of make small investments throughout the day to our hydration, and just always have that water bottle near us. And we'll talk about some of those tips in a second. But, making sure that we're, again, just a reminder to avoid these signs and symptoms of dehydration: the thirst, the headache, the muscle cramping, the early fatigue. If you're experiencing any of these, it's a sign that that we need to do something with your hydration. And then I mentioned the frequency that you should be using the bathroom every 2 to 3 hours during the day. So how do we kind of get into the elite hydration planning phase? These are just on one side of the screen, we've got kind of general, but now let's get into really kind of elite hydration planning. So we're talking about hydration timing around your activity. Let's talk about pre-hydration. So we want to do at least 16 ounces, which would be half of that green Gatorade bottle, on your way to training in the morning if you have a morning training. And so this can be kind of tricky if you're really kind of trying to maximize your sleep and then just get to training and run out there and start. Sometimes people are at risk for dehydration if they take that approach. So one recommendation: to keep that water bottle on your bedside, and as soon as your feet hit the ground in the morning, take a good drink of water. That's a good way to ensure that you're going into those early morning training sessions with at least 16 ounces of fluid on board. All right. During your training, we can ideally drink to your sweat rate. So we can calculate sweat rate by doing that pre-training to post-training weight and looking at how many ounces or how many pounds of weight somebody lost during that time. So let's say they trained for an hour and they lost 2 pounds. All right. 2 pounds of fluid is about 32 ounces of water. So if we know that, then we can kind of split it down a little bit further and then say every 15 minutes, maybe they need to be getting a set amount of water to ensure that they get that 32 ounces of water and don't have such a large weight loss of fluid during the activity. And I know this can be a lot. So if you need help with these calculations, come by Performance Nutrition, and one of the dietitians can help you calculate your sweat rate. We just would need some of that weight data in order to do it. So, but you don't have to get that crazy. If you're not interested in going that far down the road, you can just kind of estimate that the average person probably loses 6 to 10 ounces of fluid every 15 minutes during exercise. And so every 15 minutes, hopefully you have an opportunity to get some fluid in, and you're kind of trying to get at least 6 ounces in. We, as a rule of thumb, say that kind of one gulp or one swallow is an ounce. So every time you get a water break, make sure that you're getting at least 6 good swallows of fluid. That's a good way to kind of get your in training hydration in a good spot. All right. And then in terms of rehydration, we're looking for 16 to 24 ounces of fluid for every pound that you lost. So then we're kind of looking at that weight data again. All right, did we lose 2 pounds of fluid, which would be that 32 ounces? Then maybe we're looking for somewhere between 24 and 48 ounces. Again, there's a little bit of math involved here, but hopefully I can kind of get your brains kind of thinking around how to do this math for yourselves, or come and talk to Performance Nutrition a little bit more about how to do this math for your individual needs. So let's just do a couple quick tips for drinking more fluid. Some of you on this call may be thinking, I definitely am in the boat where I need to improve my hydration. And so a couple of tips, maybe one of these will work in your situation, is maybe you're a goal setter, you like to set goals and you like to track them. There's also some apps available that can help you track your fluid or even remind you to drink every so often. Some of our athletes will set alarms every hour, every 2 hours, just to make sure that they get a drink, especially if they're really focused during a study session. They can kind of forget to drink a little bit, which is totally understandable. Keeping a bottle with us is really incredibly important. It should be kind of your third arm, if you will, in that you always need to have a water bottle with you. You can personalize the water bottle. You can buy a really nice water bottle for yourself as a gift. Just make it something that's kind of always with you. If you're not a fan of just plain water, you could add berries. You could add watermelon, or you could add watermelon, you could add lemons, you could add cucumbers. There's lots of options for kind of flavoring your water with natural fruits and vegetables even. Just making sure that you drink water at every meal. I know that everyone these days is going 100 miles an hour in different directions. And so just stopping at your meals and saying, do I have a fluid with this meal? That can make an impact as well. You can even make an impact on your hydration by eating watery fruits and vegetables. So that would be like the watermelon that we discussed, or the grapes. Maybe you want to include a little bit more soup in your life, because that's going to be another source of hydration. Another thing to remember is just, if you're carrying that water bottle around, just make sure that as soon as it's empty, no matter what, you go and fill it up, because there's nothing worse than having an empty water bottle just hanging around with you for a couple of hours when you're thirsty. And then just identify, especially now, just identify where are those filling stations. I know a lot of the drinking fountains are closed right now, but identify where are those filling stations, and how am I kind of passing them throughout my day, and am I taking advantage of those? So I put up here a couple of pictures. One of them is just the spa water that we like to call the water with the fruit or the vegetables in it. And then just some messages that you could put on your green Gatorade bottles, just as reminders. So let's go on. We have some decision trees here, because the next questions we usually get are, okay, how do I incorporate Gatorade into this? How do I incorporate electrolytes into this? How does that really work? And so the rule of thumb is that if you're working out hard, longer than 60 minutes and definitely longer than 90 minutes, you're going to need some additional carbohydrate for your exercise, and you're going to need some additional salt for your exercise. So for many of you, that's daily that you're working out hard more than 60 minutes. So you may have to incorporate this in right away. And so you have a couple of options. Either your first option would be, before that training session starts, maybe you get in your carbohydrates through your pre-fuel that you eat. Maybe you're going ahead and having some crackers, or you're having a peanut butter and jelly sandwich as part of your pre-fuel, or maybe you're having a bar, and that has at least 60 grams of carbohydrates on it. And you can check the label, make sure you got enough carbohydrates in there. And maybe especially if you're a salty sweater, you're going to want to make sure that this source of carbohydrate is also a salty one. So maybe pretzels is part of your pre-fuel just to get some salt in. Now, if you're not able to do that pre-fuel and you're not able to get a salty 60-gram carbohydrate pre-fuel, this is when you really need to consider a sports drink for those activities lasting longer than 60 to 90 minutes. A sports drink, and we'll talk about a couple of different options, is going to be great because it's going to increase, they're quite tasty usually, at least to most people. And so they encourage you to drink in that way. They have some sodium in them that can replace your sweat sodium losses. We'll talk about what those might be in a second. But they tend to be a pretty easy and efficient way to get in the fluid, the carbohydrate, and the electrolytes that you're going to need in order to do that hard training session. So you might want to take a quick screenshot of this decision tree. And if you're kind of thinking about different situations in your life, in your day, just kind of go through this decision tree and see, is Gatorade a good option for me right now? Is water okay? Can I substitute with a snack? This decision tree should help you do that. So make sure you get a picture of this one. All right, so if we've decided that we want to do some sort of a drink, how do we know which one? All right, so we have a couple of options here at Northwestern. We have Gatorade Endurance Formula. We have the kind of standard thirst quencher. We have a G2 option, and then obviously we have water. So endurance formula is really appropriate if you're a salty sweater. I'm going to show you some information soon that talks about exactly how much sodium might come out of people in their sweat and how we can replace that. So if you're a salty sweater, or if you're a frequent muscle cramper, and we kind of attribute that to sodium losses, this is a really great option for you. If we are preparing for an intense workout in the heat, and we know that we're going to be sweating more because of the sweat physiology that we talked about earlier on, this is a really great option, the Gatorade Endurance Formula. Okay, the thirst quencher, the standard Gatorade would be, in the standard situation you're preparing for, or you are currently doing, or maybe you just finished an intense workout that's lasting longer than 60 minutes, and you're going to need more than just plain water in order to rehydrate yourself and get that salt back in, get those carbohydrates back in. This is a great option, just kind of a standard go-to. We also have G2, and we get a lot of questions about G2 and when is G2 appropriate. So the important thing to know is that the difference between regular Gatorade and G2 is pretty much the carbohydrate content. So we need to be thinking about, during intense exercise, we could be burning about 1 gram of carbohydrate a minute. All right. So if we're depending on our sports drink in order to provide us with that carbohydrate fuel to do that exercise, then G2 is not going to be the solution, because G2 doesn't really have very many carbohydrates in it at all. So if you're somebody who's using G2, it's probably best that you're talking with a sports dietitian about how you're using that to your advantage. G2 should not be kind of the standard go-to fuel for exercise. It's more of a specialty type of Gatorade, so it's important that you work through that with us because of the no carbohydrates. The electrolyte content is very similar to Gatorade though. And then water, we've kind of talked about water. If you're training less than 60 to 90 minutes, if your training is not going to be very intense that day, if you've worked out a different plan with your sports dietitian in order to get your carbohydrates and your electrolytes, then you can go with the standard water. So you can use this, take a screenshot of this one when you're trying to make decisions about which sports drink might be the best one for you. All right, so let's get into electrolytes. We get a lot of questions about salt and too much salt, not enough salt, and cramping. So let's get into talking about that a little bit. I think it's important that we know that sweat is more than water, of course, right? So you can see in that chart, sweat has sodium in it, it has potassium in it, it has a tiny bit of calcium in it, tiny bit of magnesium in it, and it also has some chloride in it that's bound up with the sodium. So you can see that sweat is mostly salt. All right. And this is an important concept because sometimes people think that muscle cramping can be attributed to potassium loss. That's actually not very common at all. Usually if somebody's having muscle cramping that's related to an electrolyte imbalance, it's coming from the sodium. So that's the first thing I wanted to make sure that we kind of understood there. Yeah, there's a lot of other things that can be in salt or can be in sweat, like calcium, magnesium, chloride. But these are not things that we need to ensure that we're getting as part of our pre-fuel or ensure that are in our sports drinks because they're just such a small amount. Okay. So let's go to kind of a little bit of an estimate of how much salt might be in your sweat. And I know this is a huge range, um, but it's somewhere to start. So 1 liter of sweat or 2 pounds of sweat loss is somewhere between 200 and 1500 milligrams of sodium. Chances are, if you're a salty sweater, because you can see the salt crystals on your arms, because you can see the white kind of crystals of salt around your collar or in the brim of your hat. And so if you're a saltier sweater, you can just assume that you're towards the upper end of this range. If you're not a saltier sweater, you can kind of assume that you're at the lower end of this range. We have a few products here, and there's even more than I have on this slide, that have sodium in them. We have your standard Gatorade. We have the Gatorade Endurance. It has a little bit more sodium. We even have some Gatorade packets. So we have the Gator Lights that have 750 milligrams of sodium, so a bit more than some of the drinks. And then we have a really high salt product called the Right Stuff. And so it's really not uncommon for some of our athletes to lose more than 4 pounds of sweat during activity. But that's sort of our cutoff, where if somebody's losing more than 4 pounds of sweat, which would be 2 liters, 2 of those green Gatorade bottles, we're probably recommending a Right Stuff, either before activity or in the middle of that activity. We have some athletes that actually need 2 Right Stuffs or maybe even 3 Right Stuffs during their training because they can lose 8 pounds or even 10 pounds of sweat during their activity. And so we kind of have products for everyone up and down the ranges. But I would say that if you are a salty sweater, definitely making sure that if you're going more than 60 minutes, that you're including one of these options in your plan for yourself. And if you're a salty sweater and you know that you're sweating out lots of pounds of sweat, 8 pounds of sweat, we're definitely kind of trending towards that Right Stuff option. So just a couple of things to keep in mind around electrolytes. We also have another decision tree that you could take a picture of here. This is we have a collection of salty items in performance nutrition that we call the salt vault. And so before activity, we say, if your activity is going to be more than an hour of intense activity, we need to try to get a salty snack in. So the salty snack could be a Gatorade, or the salty snack could be some pretzels. It just kind of depends on what a person needs. Okay. If your exercise is not going to be longer than an hour, or it's not going to be very intense at all, plain water is fine. No extra electrolytes are necessary. During activity, if this is going to be a pretty intense training session, you maybe haven't had any salt or any electrolytes yet, it's important that we're getting the electrolytes during training. And the easiest way to do that is through a sports drink, but you can also do it through different salty foods as well, if that works with the type of sport that you do. And then finally, after, thinking about, do I need an electrolyte after? Yeah, if you're a salty sweater and you are, experimenting with weighing yourself out after training and you've lost 2 pounds, 3 pounds, 4 pounds, you're kind of at that, in that state of dehydration, adding some salt in is going to be really powerful, because salt is actually going to help that water absorb back in your system a little bit faster than if you were to just try to rehydrate with plain water alone. So thinking about grabbing salty snacks and asking yourself some really important questions around that, you can take a nice picture of this screen to help you do that as you move forward. All right, so I want to leave you with a weekly challenge like we always do. My weekly challenge to you is to try to use this information and create a hydration plan for yourself. Maybe you start with, okay, Katie said I need to have half or 50% to 100% of my body weight in ounces during the whole day. So if you are like we said, a 200-pound person, you're definitely going to need to try to get 100 ounces of fluid in the day as a minimum. So maybe you look at your day and you figure out, okay, I can get 20 ounces here, I can get 20 ounces here, I can get 20 ounces here, and you spread that out throughout your day. And that's a really great way to start your hydration plan. Maybe you space that around your exercise, and you know in your pre-fuel, you're going to get the 16 ounces that we recommended. Maybe in your refuel, you know that you probably sweat out to a couple liters maybe during your activity, and you want to kind of replace that and get that in the refuel part. But I would just challenge you to take a look at a typical day for you and start scheduling in some of those opportunities to hydrate in order to meet your goals. And then as a second pass through your schedule, look and see where and when is it appropriate for me to add sports drinks in for extra electrolytes and extra fuel. And when might it be appropriate to even look towards a more powerful electrolyte supplement? So if you have any questions about this, again, please reach out to Performance Nutrition. We are so happy to help you with your hydration prescription, your hydration scheduling and planning. And with that, I will open it up to questions. If we don't have any questions, and I'll see everyone next week. Thank you so much.